Welcome back. When we talk about the media, we see that it has a lot to improve when it comes to covering the Ukraine war, its implications for the United States and Europe, and from China itself. So, especially if you take into account previous warfare experience. I wanted to pose some questions for the media about the Ukraine war. And for the intellectuals who still believe you can convince Putin to be a good boy. It's frustrating to see all the media coverage centered on Trump's ceasefire, which, according to the media, we would expose and would force him to divulge Putin's war plans or expose him as a liar in Ankara and Istanbul, as not sincere about peace, as if we already didn't know that after all the times he has broken his word multiple times, and after even in international accords like Budapest and Minsk, not to mention the atrocities like Bucha and Mariupol, as if we didn't know that he's a liar and a thug. All this while nobody in the media explains the following issues. Number one, why, after 17 rounds of sanctions, does Putin's machine continue moving on? And this is a very legitimate question. If the average man says, well, let's sanction Putin, but after 17 rounds, what is it? That you are going too slow, that you are too timid, or that the sanctions don't work? Sanctions have been poorly enforced in the case of the oil cap, mostly based on affidavits, while Russia mobilized with Iran a shadow fleet to evade sanctions. Countries like Turkey were, in the meanwhile, glad to blend Russian Ural crude with their own blend before exporting it to Europe, and countries like Kazakhstan helped Russia evade imports restrictions. Message: only a fool would fail to take advantage of restrictions to Russian trade when it was so easy for the before mentioned countries to evade them. So what is it? They don't work, and these rounds of sanctions are just for show, or you are too timid, and then you should be serious about sanctions and put them all of them at once. In other words, throw the whole kitchen sink on them and stop with the irritating dithering that it's only making the Ukraine war longer and costlier. Number two, what progress is Europe making on consolidating or at least regionally specializing its defense industry, without which MERS will most likely not succeed, because it's not a matter of pledging funds. Beyond sporadic information, we lack a watchdog to make accountable the countries and or interests affecting negatively this process. And why is this worrisome? Because, as I mentioned, pledging funds is not enough, as the misuse of the funds created to tackle the problems related to productivity and the pandemic show after the Mario Draghi's report on productivity can show. So lots of these funds has been misused, the progress is slow. Just pledging funds and not pledging, even delivering on these funds is not enough, because there is a difference between pledging and delivering, as we know with the pledges of artillery shells for Ukraine in 2023. Number three, what progress is Europe making to ramp up artillery and drone production when Russia is expected to produce 3 million shells and Europe only one, despite having 10 times Russia's GDP, and especially after the 2023 fiasco on artillery shells, when Europe pledged 1 million artillery shells and delivered only 300,000? Or what is Europe doing to cover the explosives shortage for these shells? Because remember, it's not just a matter of the shells, it's the explosives and the barrels for the cannons are also important components. And right now, the last I knew, there was a shortage on explosives. What is Europe doing to correct that problem? While the overhaul of European defense requires more efficient ways to address the issue of investment in technologies on which Europe is currently dependent on the United States, the short-term needs in Ukraine demand effectiveness to increase production, training, and to close the gap with Russia as much as possible. In both cases, Ukraine must be involved, as it was requested in Zelensky's victory plan that was shunned by Western powers, to make it less vulnerable to the political juncture and to take advantage of their first-hand experience with, for instance, electronic war. Besides, the integration of Ukraine to a consolidated European defense industry would allow Europe to introduce anti-corruption alarms and so avoid distractions that would discredit this endeavor. In other words, it could help even to shut the mouth of those who want to use corruption as an excuse to stop military aid for Ukraine. Number four, why is there no known effort by the West's intelligence to bring the war to Moscow? While even European media have multiple accounts of Putin's hybrid war and disinformation efforts, they have even killed an executive for a defense company in Germany, not to mention many acts of sabotage. And still, even though this is no longer a secret because it's in the press, Europe seems to pretend it doesn't exist. Well, Europe may pretend that, but the rest of the world is watching. So far, I have found no serious effort to use the internet, which, different from the mass media, is not controlled by the Kremlin. You can reach younger audiences through the internet as you could not do using mass media, Russian mass media. And the goal of this effort would be to use information to counter Russians' disinformation and create uncertainty among Russians about the abuse of their own soldiers. We've had multiple instances where they have been, with poor training, sent to the meat grinder as cannon fodder, or about the fragile and sustainable situation of their economy. On the contrary, we must remember the fierce opposition by Biden to Zelensky's use of drones to bring the war to Russian cities due to Biden's irrational fears of escalation. The psychological effect of these tactics is evident, is clearly validated by facts, like, for instance, the efforts of Putin to avoid an involuntary, a forced conscription, so he could keep the conscription in the poorest areas of Russia or in their prisons. So, why? Because even Putin fears public opinion, but not the public opinion of the poor of the rural areas, but the public opinion in Moscow and the principal and the most important cities in Russia. Number five, how China's deflation might lead Xi to join Putin in the war even when it's against its long-term interests, something that Paul Krugman twice has briefly referred to as foreign adventurism. What is Europe doing to lure China to a trade deal on the condition of cutting the lifeline that has kept Russian military production rolling on? Of course, you may say, is that there an effort on this direction? And my answer would be no. But the question is, why is move in this direction not happening? China, unable to solve its deflation problem, should be interested in such a deal, but that won't happen under coercion, as Biden wanted to do, to not look weak on China. Besides, China's excess capacity, since China is the world's second largest economy, is also our problem, as a mass depreciation of the yuan would create a huge upheaval comparable only to Trump's tariffs. On the contrary, we keep doing idiotic things like selling weapons to Taiwan, as if that could make a difference under any war game scenario, not even in the case of the Philippines. So why are we doing things that are not going to make a difference while we come short of doing the things that could actually make that difference? Number six, we are repeating history, especially the case of Czechoslovakia in 1938, and not invoking the need to prevent it with a new Ukraine narrative. As with Hitler's Germany, today's Russia's economy is addicted to war, and the Allies' answer is bullying Ukraine into making concessions. Are there parallels more relevant than this? And if not, why is not the media not invoking these clear parallels? Number seven, why is Europe letting Orban leech it without suspending Hungary's voting rights, while Orban sides with Putin every single time against European interests, like in Romania, so projecting weakness before countries like Poland, Slovakia, Moldova, and others, and proving correct Putin's Georgian model? In other words, Putin has two models: Ukraine, which is war; Georgia, which is destabilization. Um, Unfortunately, Europe projecting weakness is validating this approach, while they suffer an hybrid war, and so the question seems to validate Prime Minister Ishiba from Japan fears about NATO, how reliable is NATO, especially Europe in this case, when they are so evasive about Ukraine, when they seem to be so little concerned about Georgia. Why has Europe not suspending Hungary's voting rights to prevent its opposition to the so needed overhaul of European defense system. So far, the move has been to appease Hungary with concessions so Hungary doesn't side openly with the Kremlin. Putin is not going to accept a peace that is not humiliating enough for Ukraine, so making it ripe for destabilization and to apply the Georgian model. And if that happens, what countries is still going to trust Europe? Poland is losing patience with Europe's dithering, and far-right populism is taking advantage of that. Romania has barely escaped the Georgian process for very little, and even Merz, who is new in this so needed leadership, has called for cutting aid to Hungary and suspending its voting rights. And yet the rest of Europe seems to prefer appeasement. So let's not push our luck, because the less you think, Europe could be seen as a paper tiger. The more it's seen as a paper tiger, the more emboldened Putin is going to be. Number 8, why doesn't Europe seize once and for all the Russian reserves under European jurisdiction? Because with Trump in power, I cannot demand the same thing as I did when Biden was in power and did nothing. Just he made just excuses. He seemed to sink his objections with every opening Europe had. So in the end, the seizure of these reserves never took place. How can it fly the argument that seizing such assets will check investors' confidence in the financial system, when it's precisely Putin the main stabilizing force worldwide? What other countries are in the same predicament? There is only one, Russia. Are there many other countries that are playing similar roles and therefore afraid of seeing their reserves seized? That's ridiculous. They even have Lawrence Tribe. Biden and Europe had Lawrence Tribe's opinion since September 17, 2023, and the president of Kuwait after the Iraqi invasion of 1990 are enough for they to move in the right direction, and yet they keep dithering, and by doing so projecting weakness and indecision. 9. Finally, why do Starmer and Meloni insist on clinging to Trump's card when Trump keeps making concessions in advance and Peskov and Lavrov even mocked his ceasefire? Peskov demanding Zelensky's capitulation as a precondition for talks, and Lavrov praising Trump's handling of the ceasefire talks. This is ridiculous. This makes NATO look weaker. They make them look like fools that could be played by Putin in this farce that has become the Trump ceasefire. If they are buying time for the so needed overhaul of Europe's defense, we want to see concrete steps. We want to be as much as possible, want to be updated about this process. If they are just dithering and hoping that another Minsk Accord, actually not even that, at least Minsk and Budapest had the fiction of guarantees. But if they hope that a new Minsk Accord is going to work, they are beyond irresponsible. And we want to know whose politicians are putting Europe's security at risk with such infantile expectations. Don't we have enough evidence at this point to call this ceasefire attempt a farce. And I could give you more examples, just in the case of Ukraine. It'd be laughable if it were not so tragic. So the question is why the mass media, mass broadcasting, and even YouTubers who have a name not addressing this issue. Because the more you put them in the spotlight, the less likely is that politicians are going to try to go around these issues and go to some patchwork like Minsk that is going to mean nothing and is going to invite only bolder and wider aggression, while the world confirms their fears that you cannot trust when it comes to security, you cannot trust the West. And having said that, let me leave you with our newscast.
Good evening. This is Brian Thomas Simons, and these are the main headlines of this hour. Among other news,
new 266 executive decisions were released in the Oval Office during the weekend. Among them, A. Harvard's endowment fund will have to invest at least 50% in the dollar Trump meme coin or lose tax-exempt status and be excluded from the tax cuts in the Big Beautiful Bill. B. In Washington, D.C., at U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro's petition, neighbors who called the police to complain about her recurrent overnight screaming, mostly at 3 a.m., will be deported to South Sudan. C. Secretary Rubio will be denied permission to visit the U.S. and even leave the Maldives. Despite Rubio holding 4 positions in his administration, President Trump declared that, since he has his electronic signature, his presence was unnecessary in Washington. As Secretary Rubio declared to be bored in the Maldives and would have requested permission to at least visit Florida, Trump sent him 3 more medals and a copy of the executive decision. Peter Navarro debates Ron Vara. Long-awaited debate reveals the significant discrepancies between President Trump's tariffs czar, Peter Navarro, and his tariffs top advisor, Ron Vara. Basically, the discrepancies are, A. Peter Navarro believes President Trump is the best president in the history of the universe, and Ron Vara believes President Trump is the best president of all the universes. B. Peter Navarro believes the uncertainty afflicting the economy is due to the trauma of Biden's presidency. Ron Vara believes the uncertainty afflicting the economy is due to the trauma of Kamala Harris' vice presidency. C. Peter Navarro believes Ron Vara is the best economist alive after him. Ron Vara believes Peter Navarro is the best economist alive after him. Both agree that 2025 and 2026 will be years for the economy that nobody will forget. Peter Navarro sues the Business Standard for saying that he and economic expert Ron Vara are the same person. Peter Navarro sues the Business Standard for saying that he and economic expert Ron Vara are the same person. Tariffs czar Peter Navarro has filed a lawsuit against the Business Standard for saying that he and economic expert Ron Vara are the same person and demanded that the case be seen by one of Trump's appointed judges. President Trump told me, sue them, then I'll send Steven to see they settle, then nobody will say you two are the same person. President Trump is the best president in the universe. And don't look at me like that. Ron and I are good friends, not like an imaginary friend. He has always supported me in my career. That's why I couldn't give them a pass on that. Press Secretary exposes USAID DAI programs in fiery presser. Ms. Levitt exposed wasteful DAI USAID's health programs in Africa. Like the initiatives for HIV/AIDS prevention and treatment, malaria control, maternal and child health, and strengthening health systems. Since they are focused on Africa, they are DAI and, therefore, unacceptable. For how long will the taxpayer have to put up with spending on gay comic books, trans operas, malaria, or maternal and child health care? Asked about Ms. Levitt's declarations, Senator Schumer declared, "We will win. We will win. We won't rest. We look forward, not backwards."
This has been the news of this hour. Sponsored by Church of the Holy Redeemer's Power in the Spirit. Have you accepted Jesus Christ as your personal Savior? Did you vote for Trump in 2016 and then in 2020? This is the right church for you. If so, Church of the Holy Redeemer's Power in the Spirit is the only Christian church that can promise you in the Lord to have 72 virgins in heaven for only a donation of $50 a month. You will have access to those 72 virgins in heaven. For an additional $25, you will be allowed to replace 10 of them, and for $100, Heaven Premium, you will be allowed to choose them for yourself. Guaranteed, if you're not satisfied with those 72 virgins after you die, full refund of your money. We accept Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and Discover.